Hello, friends. So today I'm joined by my friend Jessie. I'll have her channel linked. And we've recently decided it'd be fun to start kind of long format discussions, sort of the behind the scenes of things to do with Booktube, being a viewer versus being a creator. And we started by actually having a video over on Jessie's channel talking about book boxes. And she was reading off some thoughts that other people had about book boxes, and it was kind of a mix of a reaction, a discussion, our thoughts, and we thought it'd be fun to expand that and do a lot of different discussions. And so over on Patreon, we did a vote to see for which one sounded the most engaging for the next discussion, and this one was at the top: Booktube as a job versus Booktube as a hobby. So we're going to start. Oh, hello. It's very nice to have you joining. We're going to start with, is it currently your job? Do you want it to be? And I'm assuming most people who would be watching this have watched both our channels, so you might already know the answer to this, but I still wanted to have this here in case anybody's new or actually doesn't know the answer to this. So I'll let Jessie kick it off.
Yes, so it is not currently my job. I am actually on maternity leave from my full-time job. And during this maternity leave, on top of the full-time job of being a mother, I also wanted to try and attempt to see if I could take Booktube a little bit more seriously as a potential job, even if it's not, a full-time job, maybe like a part-time job. So during this maternity leave, when I've had time, I've been trying to prioritize it and make it more like if it were a job, what would it be like? What could I make it be like? So yes, I would love it to be my full-time job, but at the moment it is not.
How do you think that if it is your full-time job, or currently in this sort of like you're kind of in between this transition period, what have you been doing differently, if anything? Do you find that besides just, maybe trying to spend as much time as you can, that's a big part of it, but otherwise, would you say that you've thought of it differently, or that you think of any aspects of it in a different way when you're trying to have it be a job?
That's a very good question. I would say during this time, I've tried to up the amount of videos I've been putting out. I used to not have a regular routine with my videos. It was kind of just whenever I had something ready to go, I would put it up. And when I changed mindsets to make it seem more like a job for me, I was like, okay, I have to stay on a very strict schedule for myself, and I really want to block time off to make sure I'm filming ahead of time, make sure I'm editing, and have things ready to go a week in advance, 2 weeks in advance. So I kind of treated it like, all right, I need to have a set schedule and a set routine around creating content for this now.
I think that's a big thing for me. So to kind of answer this question, this first question, it currently is my job. And another thing is, how did it become my job? I never intended for it to be my job. I actually never wanted it to be my job. So kind of in an opposite camp from Jessie. I used to teach private violin lessons. I really enjoy doing that. I really enjoyed being able to teach. And actually, one thing I feel like is related to, it maybe doesn't feel like that, but teaching and doing Booktube is I just like to share information with other people, and in a way that is hopefully helpful and enriching in some way, not to try to elevate what we do as if it's on. I mean, being a teacher is an incredible profession. So I'm not trying to say like Booktubers are just like teachers. We're just as important. I don't mean it like that, but I do find that aspect of Booktube, and when I used to teach and do both at the same time, I just had so much fun being able to inform. And then also something that's shared between both things is that sense of being able to do something together, being able to play music together, being able to share. They're art forms, right? Writing is an art form, music is an art form. So being able to be expressive about it and then express that with other people and hear their thoughts. So it's just such a lovely combination of things. But I wanted teaching violin to remain my job for as long as I was happy to do it, and then have this be something I did as kind of a creative outlet. And I really didn't want it to become my job because I always wanted it to continue to be something that it was just not just for fun. It is for fun, but also just to make sure because a lot of people say don't do what you love for your job because you won't
Right.
love it anymore. And I didn't want to turn it into something like that. The reason it became my job was because I think most people know, but in 2020, my dad became quite ill, and they never determined what was the issue. But obviously, during 2020, there was also the pandemic, and he was very high risk already, being elderly. And even before things got to a really bad point, even just at the beginning of it, I made the decision to move in with him anyway because I figured at the time he was going to need surgery, and I thought he'll need somebody there to help take care of him in the recovery, because we were thinking he would eventually recover fully and then he would be up on his feet again, and that's not what happened. But it was the pandemic anyway, so I wasn't going to be able to teach. And I just figured this is a perfect opportunity. I didn't get to see my dad a lot growing up, so I was also really excited to have that additional time with him. And I figured even though I'm going to be losing my, at that time, main source of income, which was through teaching, I did have this hobby that at that point was starting to make money. And I figured, well, if I move in with my dad and eventually if we sell the place we were living in, then I have some time to sort of transition. Maybe eventually I'll come back to teaching. We didn't know because the pandemic, nobody could really anticipate how long that was going to last for. But then my father did end up passing away, and this was kind of what I had at that time. I don't know if other people know, when you teach private violin lessons, a lot of it is through word of mouth, the area you live in, students being able to come to you being able to go to their homes. I was on the complete different side of town at that point, so it really wasn't going to make sense to start teaching again. And then on top of that, people that I was teaching previously, they would have kind of trickled in, as far as maybe some students would want to pick it up again and others might have wanted to wait. And you know how it was when we were first kind of coming out of it. So I just knew this wasn't going to be a reliable source of income. But if I really put a lot of effort into my channel more, I was already posting almost every day before that happened. So I was like, I'll just try to maybe make the quality better as far as the equipment I was using and the lighting, if I really am able to get those things. So that kind of answers like the what changes if it's a job, if anything. For me, it was like, okay, well, now I don't feel bad spending the money on equipment and things like that if I'm really going to go for it. So that was how it was a very long way to say that's how it became my job, even though I didn't want it to be. It just made the most sense. And one of the perks, and one thing I wanted to touch on, is even just doing it as a hobby is a privilege. And so I wanted to touch on that because this is something I think is absent from a lot of conversations. And a lot of people who want to do this for a job, or people who even want to start this as a hobby, I think they feel so held back because they don't have that much time even to read. They feel like I don't even read enough, even though I want to be a part of the conversation, which that's not true. If you read, if you like to read, everybody should feel welcome to join. But there are privileges that go into doing it both as a job and as a hobby. So I wanted to touch on those really quick. And I've been talking for a long time. So go ahead and say whatever's on your mind with this.
This is a great one. And I think that, like you said, it gets left out of the conversation a lot. So one thing that I would note is if I were to ever make this a job, I don't realistically think it could ever replace my full-time job. It would potentially be like a side job with maybe some other part-time, maybe like supplement some of the other stuff. But the reason it could potentially be that is because I have a partner who has a full-time job and has health insurance through that full-time job and has benefits and that sort of thing, that takes care of our family, where, hi Amanda, where I don't have to provide my own health insurance if I were to be self-employed. Like, that is a huge privilege. So I think that there's definitely things like that to consider when transitioning to self-employed. Those are the things that come to mind that are like such a privilege for me to be able to even consider that. And like you mentioned, like, even if it's just a hobby, like the fact that I have 2 sets of grandparents, like I have 2 kids now, a 2-year-old and a newborn. And a lot of people are like, oh my gosh, Jessie, how do you do it? How do you balance that? And I'm constantly like, I don't like, I have so much help outside of that. It's not just me. And as like a single mom, and I have a partner who works from home, that's huge. I have my parents that are 10 minutes away. I have my partner's parents that are 10 minutes away. I'm so incredibly fortunate to have all of that help, where if I need some time to myself, I can just pick up the phone and say, hey mom, do you mind just coming to watch the girls for a second? So I'm incredibly privileged in that way. And so I'm not like a superwoman trying to balance everything. Like, I have so much respect for the people who are able to balance that. Being a single parent or not having the amount of help that I have is, it's incredible. So those are some of the privileges that contribute to me being able to potentially make this like a side job or even just make it a hobby.
And this is a little bit more of a this is a little personal. So if you're like, I don't know if I want to say, but child care can cost so much money. And so
Yes.
having,
Yes.
so by having those parents, that also helps with the money side of it as well.
Yes.
Okay. I
Yes,
didn't,
and just
because I
even
didn't know
having
if you
money
had,
to have childcare. Like, I have my toddler now goes to a, like, daycare school, and we have the means to pay for that. So, like, that is a privilege as well, like, a great point. So, yes, all of that, all the above. Like, I have a lot of help, and that is the only reason I can make any of this happen.
I think one thing that's very similar for both of us is the fact that we've had our significant others the whole time that we've been doing it.
Yes.
And that
Yeah.
does help tremendously. I don't
Yeah.
have children, but I have always, not always, but for most of my adult life, I have been self-employed. When I graduated college, I worked several jobs through college and finances. Apologies if anyone's wondering why I do this. It's to focus the camera. But anyway, hopefully it's not distracting. Back to the point. I went from working a ton and then eventually was able to make enough doing what I did with private violin lessons. I also would every now and then do sectional coaching for high schools and things like that. But when I started to transition into doing this full time, I was accustomed to doing things self employed. And I was able to do that because Sean and I were married pretty much right out of college. We were college sweethearts. And his job does have good benefits. Uh, Neither of our jobs make us very much money. I think that's a question a lot of people probably want to know about. I made more money before when I used to do this as a hobby and taught private violin lessons. I never made as much as a lot of other violin teachers because I just couldn't bring it in me to like charge the amount that a lot of people do, because I remembered being a kid and so badly wanting violin lessons, and we couldn't afford it for so long because it was so expensive. And so I never wanted a kid to miss out on lessons just because the price was unattainable for their family. So I usually didn't charge that much. But I figured combined with what I was starting to make with doing Booktube, I was like, I mean, this is comfortable. We were able to do all these, mix of things to make it comfortable. And then after everything happened in 2020 and there's that transition into doing this full time, I did obviously lose a lot of income. I think one of the misconceptions that would be the case for me, this isn't true for everybody on Booktube,
Mhm.
but I probably make a lot less than people would think. I absolutely could not do this if I did not have Sean, if I was not married. And it's what you were saying. It's not that Sean makes like so much money. He works for a grocery store. People don't know, but their benefits are fantastic. So that's a big thing when you don't have to worry about your insurance. And this is going to be different depending on the country you live in too. But when you don't have to worry about your insurance, that's a huge, huge part of it.
Yeah.
So I'm very lucky in that way. Even when I just did it as a hobby, I was lucky to live in an area where access to books is pretty great.
Mm.
I know a lot of people, depending on where they live, they don't have libraries nearby. They don't have great local used bookstores nearby. Transportation is a big thing for a lot of people, and it's pretty standard in Arizona where I live. To most people have cars, and their freeway access is very good and things like that. So that was never an issue when it came to if I had a book I wanted to pick up, I could probably pick it up pretty quickly. As far as making it a job now, another thing that contributes to financially. So when I lost that income from no longer teaching, a big thing that helped is that my dad, when he passed away, he lived in a mobile home. I've actually kind of technically lived here since I was about 10 years old because when my parents split up, at one point he lived in a single wide and then he upgraded to a double wide mobile home, and that is this place. So it's very old, and we recently had to replace the roof, which was like my entire income for the year. But its payments are so cheap, so unbelievably cheap. So in a way, it's like the money I lost, it feels as though I'm making that amount back
Yeah.
because the difference between it and where we lived previously is so different. And I don't think I would be able to only do this if it weren't for that. So there's a lot of things that help in that way. Are there things that you feel like on Booktube itself are privileges? I mean, a lot of people talk about if you're able to have the books
Yeah.
and like the aesthetic and things like that. Do you feel like that makes as big of a difference maybe as some people feel it does?
I mean, probably, and I don't wanna, like, contribute everything to that because I don't want people to think that they can't have a channel if they don't
Yes.
have these things, and I think that that's really important to remember. I mean, you see a lot of very, very popular booktubers got their start without a single book behind them, so I think it's just about, a lot of it's personality, a lot which is super subjective. I mean, a lot of it is, like you mentioned, like, access to the right books, and a lot of it's just yeah, like, some of it is probably the aesthetics of the video or being able to afford, like, the nice camera. I film on my phone, so
Yeah, I
I,
do.
uh,
I do too.
I don't have, like, a super nice camera,
Look,
and I
it's
just have, like,
Luna.
a little ring light. I just have, like, a little
Sorry.
ring light, so you don't even have to have, like, the super expensive equipment, but I'm sure that helps, and just, like, the
Yeah.
capabilities of figuring out how to edit and do all the fancy editing, I'm sure helps as well. Um, so I think that there's definitely privileges to having, like, the books in the background and being able to afford the equipment and that sort of thing that definitely plays a factor. But I also just don't wanna discourage anyone who doesn't have those things to think you can't have a
Yeah.
channel.
Yeah. And something you touched on, so the editing and the software and things like that. This is not true for either of us, but one thing that maybe is helpful to keep in mind when you do see people that it feels like, oh my gosh, how do they balance being able to put out these videos and have this great quality and things like that? There are a fair amount of people that do have editors, so they themselves are not the
Oh,
ones
yeah.
editing. And there are also people that make a lot on Patreon, and as a result, they don't have to make as many videos. They can spend a lot
Mhm.
more time. If they are editing themselves, they can spend a lot more time on editing because they don't have to try to get as many videos out. And then they also, sometimes people don't have to read as often because they don't have to worry about making as many videos because they have that income from Patreon. That is not the case for you and me.
Yeah,
uh, but
totally.
that is the case for some individuals.
Yeah.
So I always, I mean, I think it's really nice when I see people being nice on the internet, when people are like, you work so hard. Not to me, but if I see it, I mean, it's also nice if someone says that to me. But I just mean, when I see it said to other people, and I know that those people have a lot of the privileges that we're talking about, and it's not really an acknowledged thing. The reason that makes me kind of sad is because I think it ends up making people feel bad about themselves, because then they think like, why can't I do all of this? How are they able to manage? You're like, well,
Yeah.
some people have partners, like we both have. Some people have
Yeah.
somebody else editing. Some people don't have to worry about a lot of the how time consuming certain aspects of this can be because they have so much else going on. And then they also have a lot more money coming in from things like Patreon. And
That's a good
a
point,
lot of
yeah.
times, Patreon, um, it depends on how high the price is for the lowest tier. So
Mhm.
for me, the lowest tier is $1. And I used to have it where different tiers meant different things. And then just like with violin stuff, I'm like, but I just feel bad at the idea that someone couldn't afford one of the perks. So now it's like any tier has access to anything. Cause I'm like, I just can't. And then also I have the lowest at $1 because I'm like, if somebody wants to support me, like, I just think that's incredible. And I don't know. So
Yeah.
I just can't bring myself to not have it higher as the bottom tier. But there are people that will have the bottom tier at $5, or they'll have like 7 and 12 or something like that. And so it doesn't take that many patrons then for that individual to start making quite a bit of money, which is great. I mean, I'm glad that there are people that are able to comfortably do that. It's just I don't want anybody, like you were saying, where you're like, I don't want anybody to feel like they can't start a channel or anything like that. I wouldn't want anybody to ever feel bad because they're wondering like, why can't I can't even manage fill in the blank. I just don't want anybody to feel that way because I think people do. I think social media can contribute to people feeling pretty bad about themselves. And yes, there are some people that are incredibly hardworking. Some people also just love to work. But a lot of the times when you see somebody doing something pretty much full time, they probably have some additional help here and there. What are some misconceptions, though, that you think exists about it as a hobby versus it as a job, or just about both things?
Good question. I mean, I don't know if people think that booktubers make a lot of money, but
Some
it
do. Most
that's
don't.
I
I
would say
think
it's a
that's
misconception. You have to have a humongous channel. And I think another thing is what I learned when I was starting to try to really kind of make money from this was the subscriber count. Like, sure, it is nice and pleasant to like see it go up, but it actually, at the end of the day, what matters is your views.
yeah,
So you could be a huge channel, but if you don't have the views on the videos, that means you're not making much money from the AdSense piece of this. There's a lot of other
right.
pieces like the sponsorships and the Patreon that we'll talk about, I'm
Or for
sure. But
some people have merch.
merch, yeah, good point. But that is something that I didn't think about at all. I was like, "Oh, they're a huge channel. They must be making bank." But that's not necessarily the case if you don't have the
Yeah,
views behind it. So that I mean, just like booktubers, like you have to be huge and you have to have the multiple streams of income. Uh, all you have to be firing off on all cylinders in order to be
yeah.
making a really, really good amount of money.
Yeah, if you ever are
Yeah.
curious, if you're ever curious about like income um on something like Patreon, you can check big creators and small creators alike and look at because sometimes it'll tell you the amount of patrons they have. A lot of people don't have the income listed. But you can see the amount of patrons they have, and you can look at the bottom tier and obviously multiply those, and you can pretty quickly figure out how much at the minimum they're making from Patreon. And there are a lot of individuals who have channels that, to your point, um, that have a decent amount fewer subscribers total than someone like me, but they make quite a bit more, 2 to 3 times at least what I make on Patreon, just because they have that tier set higher for that first tier. To a point where, because AdSense is very hit or miss and it's very up and down, and it depends on the month, it depends on the season. You're going to see AdSense go up a lot more around the holidays because advertisers are generally paying more to have ads put on videos because they want people to spend money. So you tend to make a lot more money toward the end of the year. And then there's certain times of the year where it's like advertisers know people aren't shopping, and so that amount drops. And just over the last couple of years, I've found that it has dropped anyway. So I actually make less than I used to because of so exactly what you're saying, where you would think subscriber count is the main contributor, but it's not like YouTube's like, good job, you earned it, you get more per view now, or something. Like,
Right,
it doesn't
right,
work that way.
right.
um but yeah, I think that was a big misconception. That was the one I was going to touch on, that subscriber count equals income. I mean, I think it would be really interesting, and I don't know how many people would admit to it, but I think it would be so interesting if like every booktuber who makes money said how much money they make. And I don't think you could do this because I think it would probably go against contracts, but I think it'd be interesting if everybody compared how much they've been paid from sponsors,
Yeah.
because I think that would be interesting, but also very depressing for a lot of people, because there would be people that are like, wow, I've been paid so much less than so many other people by the same exact company. And I think that would
Yeah.
bum a lot
It
of
would
people
be
out.
It'd be very interesting. I would say one other thing is probably like the fact that if you're a booktuber, you're constantly reading and having to read and all of that. And I actually think I've seen a shift recently where, like,
Reading
full-time
less.
booktubers, not necessarily you, Elle, you read a ton still, but actually read less than potentially before when it was a hobby, and I think it's because the actual content creation side of things takes up a lot more of your time, and so when you do have the free time, you wanna do something that's not
Not
related,
reading.
so you
Yeah.
don't wanna be reading, and you can, like, get away with not get away with, like, not like they're trying to, like, sneak
Sneaky.
sneaky, but, you can I don't know how else to say that, but get away with not reading as much because you can create content that doesn't necessarily require you to have this certain amount of books set. Like, vlogs are extremely popular. And you just have to be reading during a vlog. You don't have to finish books for vlogs, certain types of vlogs. So you don't necessarily always have to be reading and have to have 50 books per month read to like be a booktuber as a hobby or as a
Yeah.
job.
Yeah, I think so. I want to touch on this really quick.
Oh yeah,
That when we were talking about the transparency of income, that's like the equivalent of employers not wanting employees to discuss salaries amongst themselves. I would like transparency too. I think overall it would be more beneficial for everyone.
yeah,
Yeah, that would be nice. I do find that ironically, I think sometimes it's the people that are like, I have to do things this way because this is my income. Those are almost always the people making the most amount of money. If you hear that phrase, like, I have to do this because this is my job, I'm like, I mean, I think you're, sometimes I think there are some people that are not always, I don't want to give this like giant, like everybody's shady or something like that. But I do think sometimes people a little bit, it sounds so negative to say like take advantage of, but similar to you not knowing how else to put it, I'll say I think some people take advantage of a little bit the kindness of their viewers. Um, and they know like if I say this, they're more likely to like, because some people will be like, I'm leaving a comment for engagement because I think this deserves more views. Because a creator, if they're like, I worked so hard on this and it's getting no views. And a lot of times it is the people that tend to get more views that are saying that. Because when you're first starting, you're like, nobody gets views when you're first starting. So you don't usually say that initially, right?
right.
But then people will be like, oh, I'm here, and they feel bad for them. And then, but I'm like, I mean, you don't need to feel bad. You know, like we
Yeah,
all know, we know what it's about.
right.
Sometimes things do well and sometimes they don't. But it also, that shouldn't, I understand the sadness that goes into like when you work hard on something and you feel like it's not getting what you expected from the work you put in. I understand that.
Yeah.
But I also think it feels just a little like self-involved to be like, why is no
It
one watching my video when it's like thousands of people are watching your video? It's just not as many thousands as
Yeah.
usual.
It feels weird. It would be like at my full-time job, like complaining to my manager, like, "Meh, I'm not getting enough credit for the work I do. Meh, give me more credit." I feel like that would be just like weird. I don't know. I feel so awkward about it.
Let's see which
Yeah, that's
videos you
interesting.
found get the most views versus the videos you're most passionate. So that is something I think, yeah. And then, sorry, it would annoy me when creators blame their viewers for it. Yes, that's what we're talking about,
Yeah.
and that is, and I think that's just, um, so sometimes YouTube, if you're, and this is one kind of slightly annoying thing about YouTube, is that if you do a video and it doesn't do as well, it would seem, and I've been doing this for years, so I've noticed this I've noticed this trend, I guess you could say, that the next videos you put out, they won't necessarily notify your subscribers. It's like you're being punished. And
It
so that's why a lot of times you will see creators not do so for example, I'm doing the Sanderson read along this year and posting those, which are like very long and they don't get nearly the same amount of views. And obviously they're very specific because it's like a spoiler discussion about something. Excuse me. So those aren't going to do as well. And then immediately after that, almost always it will take a little bit before
yeah.
the views go back to normal. And that's no one's fault but mine. I chose because I wanted to make those videos. So it kind of touches on this. There are certain videos that I'm like, I really want to make this. I'm passionate about this. I want to talk about this book or I want to talk about this topic, even though I know it's not going to do as well as something else. But I want to talk about it. And I think that sometimes you will find that a creator will, and this is something I do want to touch on within the cons, is I think when people start to do this as a job or when they get, even if it's just a hobby, kind of caught up in the numbers become more important than the content. And that can be one of the things that people fall into, and they're less likely probably to fall into that if it's just a hobby versus if you are trying to make it your job or you are trying to make money off of it. And so actually I feel like that's a good time to switch to the cons of Booktube as a hobby versus cons of it as a job, and then also the pros. So let's just go straight into the cons. So we'll start with the negative.
I feel like we started that, yeah. And I'm right there with you. Thought when people said that a video flopped and now it's going to affect my channel, that like there was some exaggerating going on. There isn't. Like it's actually a thing. And I've noticed the same exact thing with my own channel. Like if I have a not great performing video, the next few videos, even if I think that usually they're better, like a wrap up, like a monthly wrap up is usually like always one that gets a good number of views.
I don't want to forget, I'm embedding wrap up in my head because I have something that I was going to say earlier and I forgot. But anyway, keep going.
But it won't perform as well right after. So it's bizarre. I don't know why, and that's no one's fault but YouTube's. YouTube's algorithm.
Yeah, and just to explain in case anybody is kind of confused what we're talking about. So YouTube at some point made the bell notification, and you would see a lot of YouTubers be like, don't forget to hit the bell so that you get notified, because just because you're subscribed to somebody doesn't mean that you will be notified when they put out a new video. So if you don't have the bell notification turned on, that means you only sometimes get notified when that creator makes videos. And what we're talking about is if you did a video and it didn't do as well, it flopped. We'll use that word. If it flopped, then the next few videos, it would seem they do not recommend those as much. They don't notify the non-bell subscribers as much as they typically do. And then if you're on a roll, then it's like a snowball effect. You'll notice if you're starting to put out a lot of videos that do well, then it's like they help each other. And then the second you put out that one that doesn't do as well, then it's like you're not starting over, but you are having to like watch and wait for it to get picked back up.
Yeah.
Let me touch on the wrap up thing because this had to do with one of the misconceptions and something you were talking about before. So you're talking about how you'll actually find some of the people who are making the most money or who do it for a job don't read as much as other people who do it as a hobby, and it's just purely a hobby thing. They're just happy to talk about books and that's all they care about. They don't care about numbers. So I have found over the years that wrap-ups or videos that are just purely I'm talking about books don't tend to do as well as other kinds of videos, whether they be fandom style videos, those sorts of, or like conversations about specific topics, or any kind of like unpopular opinions or things like that, which is not to say those videos are bad. But sometimes you'll find people, they kind of start to not want to do the wrap-up style videos. They start to read less because it's not actually reading that's getting them views. It's not books that's getting them views. So you'll find sometimes the more a booktuber gets subscribers and is making more money, the less it feels like they're actually talking about books and reading books. But I did want to also touch on kind of the opposite end of that. I've also noticed a trend of people easing back the amount they read just purely because they're like, I just want to also enjoy other parts of life. And I want to see other hobbies. I want to try new things. And so that's going to eat into my reading time, but I'm fine with that. And I think that's really lovely. And I think that's a very healthy approach to reading to ensure that when you come to read, that you truly are doing it for not just like I have to get through this many books if I'm to be considered a serious booktuber or something like that. You always need to have a negative video that gets more views lined up to balance everything out. There are, it does make me kind of sad because I think sometimes, I don't want to say people fabricate the negativity, but I do think sometimes people will find it doesn't
lean into it.
yeah, it doesn't behoove me to talk about the things that I like or things that I think deserve more hype or things like that. What really helps if I just rant about books that I think are trash. I think that can occur as well. But that's another thing we can talk about with the cons. Let's keep going though. I didn't want to.
And I just thought of one more misconception.
Okay, no, that's good. That's good. Go for it.
Because that wrap up thing reminded me that a lot of people, I notice all the time there's discourse around like, why do booktubers read 25 books if you're like everybody's in competition to read the most book? No, no booktubers are in competition with each other to read more books than the other. I've never had this in all the years, the 5 years I've been on Booktube or whatever. No,
I've never come across. I mean, don't get me wrong. I think it's completely natural. And I have wondered myself, not about myself, but I mean, like, I've wondered too when I see certain amounts and I'm like, that's a lot. Did you really read all those books? You know, like, I think it's very natural to wonder that. But some people, they have all the privileges we were talking about before, or some of, and then they literally don't have other hobbies, which sounds I don't mean that in a mean way. Some people like, this is the thing they love to do. This is their favorite thing. They do it anytime they get. And so they get through more books. And that's not me. I don't think I can ever be that person. Every now and then I'll challenge myself to read like every single, because I don't read every single day. I guess maybe that's a misconception. I don't read every day. But every now and then I'm like, I'm gonna just like devote tons of time to reading. But when that happens for me, it cuts into filming time, editing time, and I feel like I fall behind in everything else. But I also just like to challenge myself every now and then just because, but it's not ever a competition with someone else. The only time I can think of reading ever being seen as a competition was like elementary school. Who can get the most AR points? You know? I don't think since then that I've thought of reading in that way, and I don't know any other booktubers who do. So
and also, I mean, we can't speak for everyone. Like maybe there are, especially if you're first starting out, or if you're thinking about
feel like you need to catch up.
You feel like, oh my gosh, do I have to read that much? Like, I need to read X amount to like keep, but I mean, no, if anything, like, I think people pay more attention to subscriber count than the amount of books that people are reading.
I was just going to say too, that so wrap-ups don't do that well for a lot of people. Depends on the creator, because sometimes that's not true for everyone, but they don't tend to be the big videos anyway. So why read 25 books just for a video that's not going to be your heavy hitter? You know what I mean?
If anything, I'm like, oh, I read 8 books and now I have to talk about 8 books in this one video and it's like so long. You have to be talking, which is why I'm switching my wrap-up style. But yeah, no, that's funny. That's true.
Back to
Anyways,
cons.
back to cons. But I think it's just what we're talking about, that if you're trying to make it a job, you can't have as much of the experimentation if you don't have the other streams of income coming in, right? Like the steady and consistent sponsorships or the steady and consistent Patreon. If you don't have those streams, then and you're relying a lot on AdSense, then yeah, I'm got distracted by images. This is, yes, the readathons. I've seen people participate, and I've done some of those in the past, and those are just like good fun. I don't know,
Yeah.
but
That's not those exist and those are fun. And those are kind of, I think, what I was describing with the like I want to challenge myself, but you're
yeah,
collectively challenging as opposed to like I want to be the best booktuber. So I'm
yeah.
like as if our
Right.
value as people are placed
Yeah,
is placed on like how many books we read compared to other people.
yeah, yeah.
um which I don't think
Um,
any of us think. But I do think it is a con that some
yes.
people, when they're first starting, like you were touching on, feel pressured to, I have to read this many books, or I have to read these specific kinds of books. And one of the privileges that we didn't touch on was your taste in books. If it aligns with the general population and you tend to love all the popular stuff, if you're a fantasy fan and you love Wheel of Time and Malazan and Sanderson, like if you love all of the, Joe Hubbard, if you love all the best stuff fantasy, your videos are probably going to do better and people are going to, I mean, I don't mean to speak about like all viewers are so dumb. But I mean, there is a chance that you'll be like, this person feels similar to me about books, and you're probably gonna gravitate towards that because that makes sense. You have similar interests, and there's nothing wrong with that. And I do think though that this can play into the cons, which is I think some people maybe they don't even do it in a malicious way, maybe they don't even do it in an intentional way, but I do think sometimes people feel inclined to be more favorable in their comments about certain books or series because they know there is a passionate fan base. And it can either, the origin of that can be, I'm kind of scared of people being mean to me on the internet, or it can be like, and again, I'm not saying everybody does this maliciously or like they are like scheming, although maybe some do, but they think like if I present my thoughts about this book or series in a more favorable way and I know it's popular, that'll probably help me get more viewers, get more subscribers, get more likes. People will respect me more because I clearly have the good taste in this genre or those sorts of things. I think some people can feel
Yeah.
pressured to say they like certain series when maybe behind the scenes they're like, well, I mean, yeah, I like it, and you're like, oh, that's not what it sounded like when you're
Sounded
talking about
like
your
you
video
loved
it
it.
sounded like you loved it. Yeah. Or
Yeah.
the
No,
opposite, like sound like you really didn't like something but you didn't want to say that.
yeah. Yeah, that's definitely something that can happen. I mean, I have not done that, and if anyone's seen my latest video, you know how bad my takes are on series that I haven't continued on with. But I can totally see that because, I mean, the big fandoms, like you mentioned, are the Wheel of Time fandoms, the Robin Hobb fandoms, the uh, Witcher or Sanderson, I mean,
Molasses,
Sanderson,
yeah.
obviously, which thank God I love Sanderson, right? Like you said, that's a privilege that I like Sanderson. But yeah, I mean, that can definitely happen. But the other, I would say, con of booktube as a job is kind of what I was getting at. You can't experiment as much with videos because of, like we talked about, the potential flop, if you will. Um, and that's where, if you have the other streams of income coming in, the Patreon or the consistent sponsorship or that sort of thing, you have that flexibility, the good taste privilege. So funny. That's hilarious, Christy. But you have that flexibility potentially to experiment more. And that I think is the biggest con, because having to make sure you're doing videos only that you think will perform well instead of ones that you just kind of want to try for fun, that's a bummer. And that's why I've seen a lot of creators create side channels, which, oh, you actually might be able to touch on more. But if you have
Oh,
other hobbies,
you're the host now. You're asking the questions.
yes, Elle, can you talk to us through that? But yeah, no, if you have other hobbies and that is appealing to a different audience than your booktube audience, then it makes sense that you would split it off into a different channel because of, like we talked about, if you're going to get hit on the views, then you don't want that to disproportionately affect your booktube channel, but you still want to have that outlet for that other thing. So that's why I have seen quite a few creators have two separate
Separate.
channels, to kind of allow for that freedom a little bit more.
Yeah.
Makes a lot of sense.
That is very true. That is a reason why a lot of people do, like you were just saying. To answer a little bit about my experience with this. So I think most people probably know I have 3 channels. I have my main channel, I have one that is for charity, and then I have one that is primarily manga, comics, video games, adaptations, those sorts of things. And I have just found that in some ways it's related to the idea of like, well, this channel is about books and it doesn't seem like people care as much about some of these other things, but I care and I know there's some people that care. So I want to still have content for those people and for myself too. But then part of it too is like I am able to do what I do thanks to the kind support of anybody who watches a video, who subscribes to Patreon, who comments. Like I get to do what I do because of our shared love of books. I do not want my channel to turn into something else. It feels like it almost would feel like I'm turning my back on everyone. It would feel like, oh, now that I've got to this point, well, screw you guys, because booktube only can take me so far. So let me talk about this other stuff that's popular and trendy and I can make more money from or something. Like that's what it would feel like. It would feel like I'm like kind of a slap in the face to the thing that got me to a point where like this is you were able to help me provide income for myself and my family during a really hard time. You've allowed me to continue to do this as my job since then. And it would just feel like kind of, I don't know, if I made it like, oh, now I'm going to talk about a bunch of TV shows, or now I'm primarily going to talk about adaptations and things like that. I'm like, well, that's not what it started as. And I just, not that you can't grow and change, but it would just feel like I used booktube. That's what it feel like. Like I used booktube to get to a certain point, and now I'm shifting just for money, which I don't want to do. So
Right.
that's part of it. And then also I just wanted to encourage myself to, because I did find that I was not reading as much manga. I wasn't picking up comics the way I wanted to, because I do want to get more into comics. I wasn't picking those things up because I was like, well, that interest doesn't seem to be there. And I'm like, well, I want to still do some of this for me. That's kind of what this started as. And I think something that is a con is that people, when they reach a certain point, they feel like they have to do things for the algorithm. And I'm like, but it's the passion for books and stories in general that brought me here, and that's what I want it to stay as.
Mhm.
That's what I want it to stay as. I do not want it to become about the algorithm. And I think that becomes more difficult when you do have it as a job, because it's
Right.
kind of hard to ignore those things. But I don't want it to be that. I came to this and I feel like a lot of people are in this sort of community and discuss things because we genuinely like stories. And so I don't want to abandon that. And I don't want to have that go away. I've seen it go away for other people. We've heard people get burned out before, and then they just sort of put out content to put out content and to try to make money or to try to get views or to not let the channel fall or things like that. And you're like, ugh. I mean, I understand if you're like, I gotta make money to pay my bills, but I don't really understand when, like you were talking about before, you have these other streams of income.
Right.
So I'm just, it is a balancing act. So I don't know. I think that's a con, is that it can for some people just turn into a money grab, I guess,
Yeah.
which is sad.
Which if you're trying to do Booktube to do the money grab thing, that's not
It's
the
rare.
right that's not the right corner
No,
of YouTube
it's rare.
to be in. Like, I think that,
Um,
you'd have a lot more luck in other corners of YouTube for sure.
yeah. Yeah. I mean, it's some people can make it happen. It's not gonna
Yes.
be like, I'm immediately gonna shoot to the top and make hundreds
Yes.
of thousands of dollars. That's not really
Yes.
gonna happen for most people, I'd say.
Yeah.
Were there other cons that you wanted to touch on?
I would say those are the big ones.
I'll say it for the hobby portion. I think it can happen where if it is a hobby, you can sort of have FOMO and feel left out because whatever else you've got going on in your life will probably take up more of your time and energy and attention. And so you might feel like, oh man, I couldn't participate in this read along, or I really wanted to be able to read
Yeah.
this, the be in part of the bandwagon for this like new release, but I can't right now. And maybe for a while you can't post at all because you've got a lot going on or something. And so I think that can be a con of doing it as a hobby, is that you just feel like
I
you
thought
never
about
get to
Mhm.
fully participate, or you also don't get to fully commit to this thing that it's like I never feel like I have the time anymore to really write. I feel like I never have the time to play my violin. Those sorts of things where that's kind of a bummer. If those were my job, then I'd get to do them a lot more. It's like the reverse of what I was saying earlier about
Yeah.
how people will say like don't do what you love for a job.
Yeah.
It's kind of like the reverse of that. When it's just a hobby, sometimes you don't have the time.
Yeah. The other thing I just thought of is one other con, I think either as a hobby or a job. I mean, less so as a hobby. It depends on how seriously you're taking your booktube hobby. The feeling of guilt if you aren't reading
Yeah.
during your free time. That's
Yeah.
something that I've struggled with personally, not because I'm in competition with other people to read the most, but I mean, if you're on booktube, your job is making content around books, so you have to be reading books. So I mean, like we talked about, you can definitely still do this without having finished a ton of books, but in my very small little pea brain, I don't have a ton of ideas in my head that don't revolve around not reading books. So all the ideas I have for videos are for reading books. I'm like, oh, I could read classic fantasy and do that as a vlog, or I could read these new releases or read some hype books and make that a vlog. So these are all my ideas. And I'm like, well, I gotta be reading for that. So I have this like guilt where if
Yeah.
I'm not reading outside of all of the other stuff going on during my free time, then I feel like I'm not being productive with my time, and that's not a great thing because reading is a fun hobby. It's supposed to be fun. You're supposed to be, like, excited to read. So, I think that that's one other con that I've had in my own personal
A
life.
con for both, regardless of whether it's a
Yes.
hobby or a job, is when you commit to a buddy read and you can't stand the book.
Oh my god. L so many times. I feel like it's only the ones we
It's
buddy read.
us. It's
It's
us. It's
it's
our buddy reads.
it's only our buddy reads. It's
I know.
I love every other book except the ones that we choose for our buddy reads.
I know.
What is the deal?
I
What
don't
is with
know.
that?
We
Why are
can't
we
find
so bad at
the
picking
first
buddy
one was a
reads?
success. That's why. We both like sort of Kaigen, and then since then
And
our
since
buddy
then,
reads are
it's
just
just been
always
like
um I had another thing I was gonna say, and it touched on something that you were talking about, and I'm completely the guilt when you're not reading. Similar to that, I feel like something for me that I struggle with is that because I guess this relates to prose too. I mean, I can do aspects of my job all over, whether it's reading or editing or things like that. I can, aside from filming, I can do a lot of my job at home. I can do it, if I go to a cafe, if I go to the library, whatever. I can listen to audiobooks while I'm at the gym. I can engage with my work in a lot of places. So as a result, I don't shut it off. And I am like constantly like where do I have time to fit in more working? That's a big thing for me. I don't know. I try to shut it off, and then I always feel like I'm behind as soon as I do. It's rare for me to go. I don't typically even take like weekends because there's always something going on, where I feel like I have to finish reading this thing. I have to finish editing this video. I have to get back to this, like whatever email thing. So I just often don't feel like I have days off. And I don't take, I'm trying to remember the last time I like literally didn't post within a week's time. I think I always, I feel like it's been years since I haven't had a video go up within a week. I think I almost always, even when I was sick. That's another thing too. That's a con. Is if you have a more traditional style of job, when you're sick, you take sick time and you're covered. Or if you want to go on a trip, you can take vacation time. If you take time off, you just are like, well, there's money I'm losing. And since we don't necessarily make a ton of money between myself and Sean, and because our old house requires a lot of money to fix things, I always feel like, oh, I can't take time. I can't take time. I have to keep working. I have to keep. And I even sat down because recently I was like, maybe I'll take time off because Sean's birthday's coming up and then it's our anniversary. And then so I'm like, oh, maybe I'll take like a week or two off. And then I'm like, no. I'll just like cut back on, I just won't post as many videos. And I'm just like, I can do it. And then I just, in my head, I'm like, I just can't, it's really hard for me to just take time off. And when I, at the beginning of the year, got COVID in February, and then I was so mad. Do you remember me venting to you about how mad I was that I got COVID?
Yeah.
And then March was like, okay, well, January was great. February is a little bit of a setback. So like I can get back on my feet. And then I got sick again in April and I'm like, no, I was so angry and I am not a crier. I am not a crier, but I was like getting so emotional. And Sean, I was also so tired when I had COVID, like a lot of people. I had like extreme fatigue. And Sean's like, it's gonna be okay. And I'm like, I have so many books I need to read, and and it's again not a competition thing. But I'm like, I had all these videos that I needed to get done, and then I said I would read this, and I have to get to this now. And then he was like, you don't have to. And I'm like, but I do. And it's just a dumb switch that I can't turn off in my head. Yeah. I do find sometimes people are like, oh, I work so hard. And every now and then I like, even to myself, I'm like, I've worked harder. That's another thing too, is I'm like, when I was in college, I worked like so many jobs to get through school, and then I had school, and then I had to practice, and I did it then. So I can do it now. And I'm always like thinking about my previous self. I'm like, I can do it. And then I think about my dad, how much he had to work, and he was like in total poverty. And I'm like, well, but I live in an air conditioned, spacious place for just the two. And then I don't know. I think about other people and I'm like, I should be more grateful. I can work harder. And anyway, you get the point. I'm repeating myself. The never ending grind.
Yeah.
Yeah.
But I
That's
think
a good way to
like
put it.
you made me think of another misconception about, I feel like YouTubers in general. I feel like this might be going away, this misconception, but like that being a YouTuber is like this easy, cushy job. It doesn't require a ton of work. And that's just, I mean, I've seen myself just trying to make this a job and how difficult it is and how much of it is out of your power. I think that that's for me a lot of what will probably never make this a full-time job for me, because I just have no control over how that video is going to perform that week, or how something's going to be received, or how many patrons I'll have, or it's like you just don't have the control over that sort of thing sometimes, and that's tough.
I think what's difficult too is it can be cushy. It can be for some people.
If you have enough views and
yeah,
that's true.
If you get a fair amount of money and you're not posting that often, and for Booktube specifically, you're not having the kind of content you're making you don't need to read that much, so then you don't have to worry about reading. Plus, you have someone else editing your videos.
That's true. It can
be. It can be, so because every now and then, there, and so it's hard because on one hand it's like it's more than people might expect, but then on the other hand it's like, but not for some people. So because there are some people that even I'm like, what do you do? What do you do? You must
That's
have so
true.
much time. Like that's what I think
That's true.
sometimes.
I think maybe it's more of the if you are grinding to make it a job or to get to that point of that consistency or that place where you can have just the stability month to month, getting to that point is the really tough part.
It's the tough
Um,
part, and it's the part where I think some people, what we were discussing earlier, like they kind of forget why they started in the first place.
yeah,
Because it becomes about like, but I have to make
right. I
more
have to
money. I have to
get
get
to
more
that
views. I have to,
point.
yeah.
Yeah.
And then there's a little part of me that on one hand, like it's tough because on one hand, I'm like, I respect the hustle. I understand that you want to try to get to a point where you can make this your job because it's your passion. So I understand wanting to make your passion your job. So like on one hand, I respect that, but it's how you go about it. Do you go about
Yeah.
it with integrity, with transparency? How do you treat people along the way? Because one thing that can happen, and I don't know if this is it's like everything else we've talked about. It's a balance. Like some things are not that most people are truly very genuine and nice, but then like yeah, the negative side can be true, and I don't want to try to make it like the negative is always the case, but some people will start to view other individuals as networking, a means
Mhm,
to an end,
mhm.
or a means to an end, and their end is like I want to make money, so I'm going to connect with all the people who are going to bring me more attention.
Getting there. Mhm.
And that's like my least favorite part of booktube is that attitude, that mindset toward other people. Because for me, and I think for a lot of us, when we come to booktube and we start making friends, it's a good genuine friendship, and it starts through a shared love of reading. So when it turns into something that it's like, well, I'm only really talking to you because um I want to gain what you can bring to the table, like that's icky to me.
Yep,
That's not why most of us are here.
right.
Depends on the person. Um
That's true. That's true. I know a lot of creators who don't edit at all. Oh, I think you froze, or did I freeze? Uh,
okay, I could still hear you the whole time.
You
Could
could hear
you?
me? Okay, I didn't know
Yeah.
if it was me or it was you. It was probably me. Oh, no. Is it me?
Are we good? Are we both good?
I think we're good.
Okay.
I think
A little hiccup there. Hopefully it
okay.
doesn't happen again. Not really sure.
No worries.
I've heard
But
there.
I was gonna say that this is so true, Amanda, and I know creators who don't edit themselves at all, which is amazing. Wish I could do that.
I've I've tried to get better at not needing to stop constantly.
Yeah, right? I know, I'm like, "Stop stumbling over your words." That's why I get so nervous with, like, live shows because 'cause I'm like, "Oh." I can
I
just edit
just feel
out my
myself rambling.
ums
I
and
I
my
know.
rambling. Yeah, exactly, my repeated thoughts.
I mean, I've done it number of times already in this discussion where I'm like, oh, just repeating
I would have
myself.
added this and this and this, yeah.
Pros.
The
Let's talk about
pros,
pros. So it's not.
I mean, the pros, I mean, this is where, for me, why I want it to become a job is I hate my job. I hate it so much. It brings me so much anxiety and stress, and as much as I wish I could turn it off, I cannot, and having to answer to someone and it is so hard. And I mean, it totally depends on your full-time job, but I hate my job. And I'm probably changing jobs, so I'm not just gonna complain about it. I am gonna do something about it next year. But it it's really hard. when you have a full-time job that you hate and that brings you so much mental stress outside of that job. And that is why, I mean, I don't think Booktube is necessarily all sunshine and rainbows. We just talked about all the cons with it, right? There's definitely things that make it tough, but I think the pros so much outweigh some of those cons that I mean, you get to read and make content about reading. I mean, what better
I know.
than that? And especially, like, again, like I mentioned, I feel guilty sometimes, but I truly, like, I love to read. Like, that is my number one hobby, and to get to talk to others and connect with others that share that, and, like, that's who you get to make content for, that is so cool, and, like, to be able to make money from that, that's
Yeah.
wild, like, that is so
Yeah.
cool. So I just it's getting to do, like, already what you love. I mean, like you said, you don't wanna make it something that you don't end up loving by making it your job, and I think that there are steps you can take. Like, I think, Elle, you've done an amazing job of doing that, making this your full-time job, making it so that you do still have the time for your other hobbies and haven't made it this, big stress in your life, and, like, are amazing with the community, and you don't treat people like stepping stones to get to where you need to be. So I think you've done a phenomenal job with it, and I truly, truly believe that. So I think that there are so many pros, and I mean, pros of it being a hobby. Again, you get to connect with people. I think that that's the biggest thing. When I had this as my hobby, it's still my hobby. It's not my job yet, but I'd love for it to be. Getting to connect with people is, like, the best thing ever. Like, making genuine friendships, and I don't have anyone in my real life that I talk with
Yeah.
about books. Like, there aren't many people who read like we do in this community. Um, so I just think that that's, like, the best part of it,
I
honestly.
mean, you
So
stole like all of the obvious stuff. The flexibility, I'll add,
yes,
is nice
flexibility.
because if I am sick, I don't have to like try because some jobs there are some jobs out there that they're like, no, we need you to come in anyway. Because it's America for you. Not that doesn't occur other places, but you know what I mean. There's some jobs
Yeah.
where the safety of yourself and others is not the number one concern. But yeah, if I am sick, I'm like, I'm sick. So I will work as much as I can, basically.
Yes.
And I talked about this a little bit when I was talking about teaching. If I wanted to start teaching violin lessons again, I'd have to start over. I'd have to build the studio up again. Whereas this, if we were to move for whatever reason, I can do this anywhere, which is nice. And I love that aspect of it. I kind of going to a con again a little bit. There is, it's amazing, like you said, that you can make money off of this. How much money you make is so up in the air from month to month that it's
Yeah.
difficult to budget, to know how much you're going to be bringing in. Sometimes certain months you're like, that's it. And other months you're like, hey, that's not so bad. So it is inconsistent, which is unfortunate, but you're making money off of talking about books. That's pretty awesome. I
Right.
think Booktube specifically is not an area of the internet where it relies on you being super tech savvy, because there are certain things, like I love to play video games, but I'm also not good with technology. So I'm just like, how do people stream? Like, I'm such an idiot that I'm like, I don't even know how that works. I'd have to look into it. And then kind of again, a little bit of a con, but a pro also. A con, like I actually have a good amount of social anxiety, quite a bit. And every now and then I have like a mini crisis where I'm just like, I can't believe I have videos on the internet. Like I just kind of I feel like once a week at least I panic a little bit. Like, what am I doing? What am I doing? I make videos on the internet. I'm an idiot on like my fourth wing review. I'm like, I actually did like really stupid skits over that. So and like live, that's why we talk about, you mentioned live shows. Like live shows scare me. That's why I like to keep them for patrons and then eventually put the replays on the channel, because I'm like, oh my gosh, what if somebody says something in the comment section and it totally derails and I can panic a little bit. But a pro, most people are so nice.
So
Are
nice.
so nice. There's like aspects, of course, to just being online that suck. But I'd say most people are very, very sweet and kind. I think fandom culture can be really awful, but that aside, just like a general love of reading, it's almost always just filled with such nice people. And you stole the answer, but I'll repeat it. I don't know that I've ever had. I don't know how to word this without being like popular now, because that's not what I'm saying at all. But I've never had this many good friends in my life. And so I think that, it's how I met you. It's how I met Shoshana. It's how I met Jade. It's how I met Roger. It's how I met like all my friends, most of my friends. And that's pretty incredible. Even like one of my friends now is somebody who recognized me and they came up to me and they like introduced themselves and now we're friends. And like, that's so cool that happened.
So cool.
It's like my worst nightmare, that experience, like that initial, like, oh my gosh, this person is like, who's this? Like, but the nicest person ever. So that's really nice.
That's awesome.
But like that's another side of it too, is like, oh, but people scare me. But
Yeah.
it's nice people to be scared by. Typically.
Yeah. Yeah, and I gotta say, like, another pro is in most jobs, if you're not self-employed, you have a manager or someone who's in charge of you
Yeah.
and that you have to report to, and to not have that would be amazing.
Yep.
Amazing.
I've been self-employed for a long time, so well,
Yeah.
when I taught private violin lessons, it's like the parents are really bad at scheduling or something, and that would drive me up a wall or whatever. So,
Yeah.
like, in a way, you kind of answer to them, but
Yeah.
not with this. With this,
But,
it's
like, the closest thing I can think of is, like, if you do say something out of line or you say something that someone takes offense to or something like that, like, people can validly, like, call you out in the comments or, like, say
yeah.
something in the comments to inform you or something like that. But I think that that's, like, the closest comparison I can say, and if there's, like, a troll in your comments, it is so like, I gotta give YouTube props for this, it's so easy to just hide it. Just hide it. And that's like if it's a troll, right? If someone's like validly commenting something that's just like constructive, then that's different than like troll behavior, calling names, being like disgusting. And they make it very easy where YouTube has something where you can hide them. So they still see their comment and they don't know that they're hidden. So they can't come over and be like, "Oh, you hid me, mer." So they don't know they're hidden, but you'll never see them
There's
again.
also certain words that you can have
Yes, you can
in
hide.
place. So if somebody calls you a dumb hoe, you're like, I don't have to see that
Yes,
because you said that, and it automatically will hide it. So that's great.
yes. So that's like the closest thing I can think of.
Yeah,
But
because when I worked fast food, I could not just be like, hide from the
yeah, I
customers
don't
who
like
were,
this nasty behavior, grossness, hide. Like
you have to be
that's so
super nice to them.
yes, right.
Yeah.
So it's pretty Susan YouTube. You're about to Susan YouTube, basically. So I think that that part of it is also really cool. Like if you have like a video that doesn't perform as well, it's like, okay, well,
And
moving on.
you get to connect with people all over the world. That's
It's so
so
cool.
cool.
It's so
Um,
cool.
and I think to your point about like not necessarily being called out necessarily, but you learn things by
Yeah.
that I think there is the potential to become very callous. And I find myself sometimes I'm like, you know what, I can't look at comments today. I can't reply because I'm just like, I know I'm mental health wise, like I'm kind of depressed or I'm whatever the case may be, there are I that's a pro. I can be like, I don't want
Yeah.
to have to look. Whereas most traditional 9 to 5s, you can't just be like, guys, I don't want to. You know what I
I
mean?
don't
Like
want to
whatever
hear your
tasks you
feedback
hate, you still have to do
today.
them.
Yeah.
Yeah. But you learn a lot about different parts of the world, different people's experiences. You start to understand because I'm very big about don't be pretentious, don't be a snob. I've never understood that mindset, but I think even for myself sometimes there are ways in which I can think about like how do I talk about a book? Because if it's something just how you review things, how you
Yeah.
try to express yourself, you find like, oh, I could be better about this, and I
Right.
know that now. As a result, you grow. And
Yes.
now a con for me in a weird way, even though I talked about being afraid of people, I am alone with my dog all day long. I don't really leave the house. I don't
Yeah.
really go anywhere. So I don't like see people or interact with other human beings, which even as an extreme introvert, sometimes just like being around other people is a good thing. So I
Yeah.
do feel like sometimes I'm a little sad, but then other times I'm like, can everybody just leave me alone? I need to be alone, even though I'm alone most of the time with Luna.
Yeah. That is one
Um,
thing I'll say is, I have a work from home job, so my experience is a little different from someone who has to go into the office. Like, that's one thing that wouldn't really change for me because this is kind of like the amount of socializing that I get in my day-to-day job. So that
yeah.
part of it wouldn't bother me as much because 'cause I'm already used to that, like, work from home environment, um,
You
which
do
is
have
a
like family and stuff around that you see too.
that's true too, yeah,
I
too.
sometimes see my mom. You know what I mean? Like I don't really
Yes,
see
yes.
anyone. I don't really talk to anyone very unless I'm like
I
messaging
could see
you or
that,
one of
that
our
would get
friends.
a little lonely, yeah.
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 I mean, it's a good thing ultimately, but I can be obsessive and I can spiral a little. So every now and then I have certain days where I'm just like in my head all day long, and it's not the best thing. Whereas there's like if it's a day that I'm spending all day writing, that's not an issue for me because I'm just
Oh,
so sucked into
interesting.
it. And if it's like a reading day, because that's usually how I approach things. Like today I'm reading this book, and because that's how I prefer to work.
Yeah,
But if it's like a editing day, because I edit everything on my phone, then I
same.
just feel like there's this like natural like I don't know, it just like your mind wanders and then you start thinking about all these other things and
Yeah,
it's just a stupid thing. Um
yeah.
Now we have a lot of other aspects to this conversation that we could touch on. There were so many other prompts, but we've already been talking for over an hour, almost hour 20 minutes. Um I mean, obviously, doing Booktube as a job, one of the things that plays into it is like sponsorships and like the money side, and that can be an entire like dedicated topic.
Mhm.
Just because we're already running a little long here. The next thing that had one in the poll, it was like very neck and neck. We both did the poll on our Patreon. Was books that we end up reviewing and like how do we choose which books we review or how do we choose which books we're going to read and things like that, which I was surprised it was such a topic of
Yeah,
interest. So that might be the next one we do. But if anybody would like to see more about, I think we touched a little bit on like the way in which you make money through AdSense and Patreon and things. But I know some people might just be more interested in like how does your mindset change when you make money, or how much money do you think? I don't know. I don't know if anybody would be interested in a specific video about just that or not.
yeah,
So
maybe.
that can be
That could
something we
that could be
discuss.
its own video, probably.
Yeah. Yeah. Um, but yeah, I think we'll end on one thing that I think kind of wraps all of this up pretty well, because this applies to hobby and job. Do you think the phrase just doing it for views has nuance?
Yes. I mean, all things have nuance. So this also has nuance to it. I think if you are doing it as a hobby or as a job, then the way you framed it, just doing it for views. Because I mean, everybody wants to be watched. Like, you want your videos to be seen. That's why you put them on the internet. Oh, Christy has a question.
No, I think she's raising her hand to say
Oh, like
she's
you want to see a
interested
video
in.
on the
Yeah,
other
I
stuff.
think that's what.
So everybody wants to have views on their videos, or else they wouldn't be posting them to the internet. And so I don't think it's necessarily a bad thing for someone to want to have views and
Yeah.
a lot of views on their videos. That's a completely normal human reaction. There's nothing wrong with that. There's nothing malicious about that. I think it's when you use other people as a way to get those views. So it's making sure
Yeah.
you're going about it the right way and for the right
Yeah.
reasons. Uh,
Yeah.
you want the views because at the end of the day, you want the connection. Like, you want to talk to people about what you
Or
love.
you want to inform people about,
Or
because a big
inform. Yes,
thing,
yes.
a big reason why I've consistently made new fantasy releases wrap ups is because I know how expensive books can be. I know how expensive
Yeah.
new books can be. I know a lot of people don't even have access the way I do through my used bookstores and things. So if somebody's interested in something, they're probably spending hard earned money on something. They want it to be something they're pretty sure they're going to enjoy. So for me, it's like, I hope this is helpful. I hope that this helps you find something that you
Yes.
will like. And so that's a big thing for me, because every now and then I'm
Yeah.
like, I appreciate watching. You don't need to feel like you have to, do anything else. So
Yeah.
I care very much about, as much as possible, informing and helping, and then a little bit
Yeah.
entertaining. One thing that I'll say with the just doing it for views is, you don't see this thrown at other jobs. So if somebody's a singer, you don't go like, oh, they just make songs for people to listen to. Or if somebody cooks, you're not like, they just make food so people will eat it. Like, they just do it for people to buy the food and eat the food. I'm like, yeah, that's why you make the thing. Whatever you're making, you make it with the intention of sharing it, unless you're doing it just for you. I don't know too many people that make videos just for themselves.
Right.
And I feel
And
like the way
post
I
them on
worded that,
YouTube.
yeah, the way I worded that made it sound like it's kind of gross. I don't know. Maybe some people, maybe like progress shots if you're working out or something. But anyway, most people don't make book related videos just to watch back and be like, let me watch back my review of this book. That's not really a thing. I have a job just to make money. I think where the just reviews is, I think there are some people that they don't care about what they're talking about at all. They
Right.
are just doing it because they just want to make money. They just want to get attention. They just want to feel validated in themselves, which is sad. So if you're just doing something like, you don't care about what you're talking about, you don't care about the people watching, you just care about what you can gain from it.
Right.
That's kind of an
Yeah.
extension of what you said, but like, that's where the problem is. But if
Right.
somebody's, yeah, I mean, like, why else would we make videos? We watch videos so that they will be viewed. That's what. No, and you certainly, a closer comparison is, nobody, I was like, directors just make movies for people to watch them. Like, duh. Yeah, that is what they do. That's what we
Yeah.
do. We make videos for people to watch. It's just much smaller. So
Yeah.
I
And
think
I don't
it
think
has
it's like,
nuance.
I don't think it's wrong to want a wide reach with your videos. I don't think it's wrong to want a lot of views. Like, I don't think it's a bad thing to want the large views.
It's like acknowledgement, what we were saying before about a
Yeah.
job, where it's a little whiny if you're like, can you please tell me again that I did a great job? Can you give me more credit? That's annoying. But if like you're never acknowledged, that's sad. That's
Yeah.
sad too. So you want that like in between.
The views, like, that's the only thing that YouTube gives you besides, like, people commenting, which is, like, the best thing ever. That's, like, the only sort of analytics that YouTube gives you as a reward for the content you make. So it's like, if you don't get views, it feels like you didn't do a good job. That's the basic, like, YouTube equivalent of, like, a full-time job. Like, that's the best way I could describe it. So,
And there's, of course, even nuance to that.
yes.
You can do a fantastic job, but maybe the thing you're talking about isn't as popular, or maybe
Right.
your channel is just not some people just have that lucky break where for whatever reason YouTube is like, this video, everyone's going to be recommended this video now, and you're like, why
Yeah, and
that one?
like my most viewed video makes no sense to me.
The YA for adults.
Why? Yeah, but like, why that one? It's like of all the videos, and then I'll like have a video that I'm thinking like, oh my gosh, no one's gonna watch this, and then it's like a ton of people do it. I'm like, that one really?
Every now and then, I actually feel the opposite. Every now and then, I'm like, I hope not that many people watch this one. Not because I don't like it, but because like I don't know. I'm like, man, I'm
You
like,
know, it's gonna be like received.
well, no, it's more. I I don't want to say that I don't hate myself, but every now and then there's just
No.
like every now and then this is a con. But maybe some people will, I don't know, relate to this. But because I edit all my own videos and I record a decent amount of videos, sometimes I'm just so sick of myself. I'm like, my stupid voice, my stupid hair, my stupid nose. Like I just hate everything. And then
Oh,
and then I'm just like, man, why does anybody watch my videos? Like or I just really I'm like, they get it. Why are you repeating yourself so much?
that's
So
the one
every
that
now and then there's like a weird, it's kind of what I was talking about with the
yeah.
crisis of, oh my gosh, I'm on the internet. But it's not because I'm like, I didn't try that hard. So like
Yeah.
hopefully nobody notices or something. It's not like that.
You brought up a really good point. I will say there are times where like the videos that have gotten the most views on my channel, I get a little bit anxious about those because they like I love like my community. Like I love the people who I see in
Yeah.
my comments all the time and
They
I
know
love
certain
you know
like
certain
mannerisms
people.
of yours. There's like an inside joke
Yes,
sometimes.
like, you know your community, and I love my community, so when I see a video kind of explode, like, outside of that, I'm like, "Oh my
That's their
god,
impression of you.
who?"
That moment's their impression of you, and that's it.
Yeah, and it's like, "Oh my god, like, who's gonna be all up in my comments?" Like, then you start that's when you start getting, like, the weird comments that are, like, a
Yeah,
little
who are these
shady.
people randomly? Yeah.
Yes, yes, and it's like, okay, now I'm a little uncomfortable because, like, I know my people, but, like, oh, who are all these other people? So
It
it's
was really
almost like
funny because
that happy medium where you know, like, you're
yeah.
hitting your people and you're hitting all of them, but you don't wanna, like, hit too many.
Well, yeah, it'd be like if somebody's first impression of you is getting to hear a message you sent to one of your friends.
Who are your people?
But,
That's so funny.
sometimes you're like if you're chatting with a friend or whatever, if you're being casual because you're comfortable around someone, it's not exactly you in your most polished, I'm applying for a job
Right,
self because you're
yes,
just casual. You say the word like too many times, whatever. You're using
yes,
your hands too much, but it doesn't matter because and it's like if somebody
yes, for
nearby
sure. Mhm.
saw that and like that's all, yeah, it's a weird idea to be like that 10-minute video is now what people think of me. And it's not that you're
Right.
like that one's it's not even that it's representing you poorly or like I didn't try that hard on that one. It's just like, but there's more. Oh, I see.
Like, go and watch all these others. No,
I
it's
remember one
exactly,
time
it's like you get
somebody
comfortable, yeah.
somebody commented on Joshana's channel talking about how it was nice that she talks about more than just Sanderson because all Elle ever talks about she only ever reads YA books and the only adult fantasy she reads is Sanderson. And I'm like, that's
She
not
clearly
even,
doesn't know Joshana because
yeah, first off, she doesn't know Joshana. And second, that's not even true.
no,
Like I have literally a lot of videos that are like adult fantasy that isn't
not
Sanderson,
Sanderson.
because I know that, but it was like, it wasn't just that you read a lot of Sanderson. It says that's the only adult fantasy that you read and everything else is YA. And I'm like, that's not even true. I don't know if you watched one video where I was talking about YA books, like one particular wrap up
Probably
or
just, like,
something.
one video.
Also, nothing wrong with if somebody mostly reads YA, but I'm just like, what a
That's a
weird
weird
decision
thing.
it was to be like, I'm going to comment on her friend's channel and tell her, like, as if Joshana's a pick me girl or something, and she's going to be like, I'm so glad you like me better than my friend, It's the opposite of Joshana's
Oh
personality.
my god. That is
Anyway,
bizarre, yeah.
it is
Anyway,
interesting.
so,
Yeah.
bottom line, Booktube as a job is a great privilege in a lot of ways. There are pros and cons to anything, but I mean, it's up to you to decide if the pros outweigh the cons. And yeah,
That was a very
basically
nice
it.
bow on this rambly video.
Yes, exactly.
This was lots of fun.
Yes.
Even though sometimes people scare me, let us know your thoughts on this topic.
Yes.
It will
I'm
be
very curious, yeah, how this will be.
I'll say one last thing. I actually rant a lot. And I feel like generally speaking, I tone it down or I hold it back because I don't want to just like always be ranting. And I get scared sometimes because I'm like, oh my gosh. Like the last video we did at the end when I'm just like, I feel like kind of bad. I feel like I just was like, who cares what you think? That's not what I meant, but it was like kind of sort of like, well, you think what you think and I think what I think, and this is all privilege anyway. So
Right, right, exactly.
what we think doesn't matter in the grand scheme of life.
Yeah,
So yeah, sometimes the internet is scary, but Booktube is pretty nice. And I'm
yeah,
glad I get
Booktube
to
is
do it for
really
my
nice.
job. And yay, books, and yay, having an income, I guess. I should have left it at yours. Yours is better. I like unwrapped the bow and then I tore the presents wrapping paper.
Yay, books.
Yay, books. That's the end. Bye, everyone.
Bye, everyone.